Mr. Speaker, this Labour government was elected to bring change to our country, to provide security for working people and to deliver a decade of national renewal. That work began in July, and I am proud of what we have delivered in just 9 months. Restoring stability to our public finances, giving the Bank of England the foundation to cut interest rates 3 times since the general election, rebuilding our public services with record investment in our NHS, bringing waiting lists down for 5 months in a row, and increasing the national living wage to give 3 million people a pay rise from next week. Now our task is to secure Britain's future in a world that is changing before our eyes. The threat facing our continent was transformed when Putin invaded Ukraine. It has since escalated further and will continue to evolve rapidly. At the same time, the global economy has become more uncertain, bringing insecurity at home as trading patterns become more unstable and borrowing costs rise for many major economies. Mr. Speaker, the job of a responsible government is not simply to watch this change. This moment demands an active government, a government not stepping back but stepping up, a government on the side of working people, helping Britain to reach its potential. And Mr. Speaker, we have the strength to do just that. As one of the world's largest economies, an ally to trading partners across the globe, and a hub for global innovation. These strengths and the progress that we have made so far mean that we can act quickly and decisively in a more uncertain world to secure Britain's future and to deliver prosperity for working people. Mr. Speaker, as I set out at the budget last year, I am today returning to the House to provide an update on our public finances, supported by a new forecast from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. Ahead of a full spending review in June, I will then return to the House in the autumn to deliver a budget in line with our commitment to deliver just one major fiscal event a year. So let me now turn to the OBR's forecasts. And I want to thank Richard Hughes and his team for their dedicated work. The increased global uncertainty has had 2 consequences. First, on our public finances, and second, on our economy. I will take each in turn. In the autumn, I set out our new fiscal rules that would guide this government. These fiscal rules are non-negotiable. They are the embodiment of this government's unwavering commitment to bring stability to our economy and to ensure security for working people. Because the British people have seen what happens when a government borrows beyond their means. The mini-budget delivered by the party opposite resulted in higher bills, in higher rents and higher mortgages. And, Mr. Speaker, it was not the wealthy who suffered most when they crushed the economy. It was ordinary working people. And they continue to feel the effects 2.5 years later of the damage that the party opposite did. The Universal Credit Standard allowance will increase from £92 per week in 25-26 to £106 a week by 29-30. While the Universal Credit Health element will be cut for new claimants by around 50% and then frozen. On top of this, we are investing £1 billion to provide guaranteed, personalised employment support to help people back into work. And £400 million to support the Department for Work and Pensions and our job centres to deliver these changes effectively and fairly. Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, the OECD downgraded this year's growth forecast for every G7 economy, including the UK. And the OBR have today revised down our growth forecast for 2025, from 2% in the autumn to 1% today. I am not satisfied with these numbers, and that is why we on this side of the House are serious about taking the action needed to grow our economy. And in December, we published changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, driven forward tirelessly by my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister. Reintroducing mandatory housing targets and bringing grey belt land into scope. The OBR have today concluded that these reforms will permanently increase the level of real GDP by 0.2% in 29-30, an additional £6.8 billion for our economy, and by 0.4% of GDP within 10 years, an additional £15.1 billion in our British economy. Mr. Speaker, that is the biggest positive growth impact that the OBR have ever reflected in their forecast for a policy with no fiscal cost. The British people will be watching. Because if the parties opposite don't support these reforms, let us be clear about what that means. They are opposing economic growth. They are opposing more homes for families. They are opposing good jobs across our country. We on this side are clear about whose side we are on. The parties opposite must decide too.
Mr. Speaker, at the last budget, the Right Honourable Lady said that she would bring stability to the public finances. Stability to the public finances. But this statement, more appropriately referred to as an emergency budget, has brought her to a cold, hard...
Can I just say to you, quite rightly I want to hear to the Chancellor. I now want to hear the Shadow Chancellor. I don't need any help.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This emergency budget, Mr. Speaker, has brought the Right Honourable Lady to a cold, hard reckoning. She has become very fond recently to talk about the world having changed. Well, indeed it has, Mr. Speaker. This country was growing at the fastest rate in the G7 only about a year ago. And just as the OECD and the Bank of England and other forecasters, and now we learn today, the OBR have stated, growth has been halved in this year, cut in two as a consequence of the decisions and the choices that the Right Honourable Lady made on her watch. Inflation, which was down to 2%, bang on target on the very day of the last general election under a Conservative government. We are now told this year will be running at twice the level as was forecast under ourselves in 2024. This is going to mean prices bearing down on households and on businesses right across the country because of her choices. And the OBR also says, Mr. Speaker, that unemployment will be rising this year and next year and the year after. And in fact, across the forecast period, it will not decline at all. So much for the Right Honourable Lady's back-to-work plans. And we have already seen, Mr. Speaker, what it means when it comes to controlling borrowing under this Chancellor. And yes, she has come forward now with a plan to squeeze spending later on in the forecast period. And she has, of course, told the OBR that these are the elements of spending restraint to which she will stick. But what do the markets think? And could I ask the Right Honourable Lady, given her track record, given the fact that she has failed to control spending and borrowing to date, what does she think the markets are going to make of her latest promises? But the Right Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker, says, of course, that none of this is her fault. It is the war in Ukraine. It is President Trump. It is tariffs. It is President Putin. It is the Conservatives. It is her legacy. It is anybody but her. Well, what the British people know, Mr. Speaker, is that this is a consequence of her choices. She is the architect of her own misfortune. It was the Right Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker, who talked down the economy. who talked down the economy so that business surveys and confidence crashed through the floor. It was the Right Honourable Lady who confected the £22 billion black hole. A smokescreen that was only ever there in order to cover up for the fact that she and the Prime Minister reneged on their promises to the British people during the last general election. And a black hole that the OBR themselves, ironically at the government's behest, have said they will not legitimise. She chose to be reckless with a sliver of headroom against her fiddled targets. She borrowed and spent and taxed like it was the 1970s. Little wonder, Mr. Speaker, that the Chancellor has tanked the economy. Little wonder we have an emergency budget, all because of her choices.